Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Malikia Young Pak dotting inside my chest, ladies and gentlemen. It is me, of course. So as you guys know, we are playing the Sinquefield Cup, and we are in round 6. And so we just got done with the game Jeffery Xiong versus Wesley. Yeah, I mean, not yet, but to all my people in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay to you. Kumusta na? Masaya kong makikinig muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Appreciate you guys very much. Hello, you lit. Appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. And we are going to go ahead and see who's malakas. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. Bam. So we got D4. Just double check that. I did it. All right, we got D4. Knight comes to F6. We see knight to F3. We got D5. Bishop to F4. So we have the London. I'm just playing. It's just normal. It's a normal opening. It's nothing crazy going on. E6. We got E3. Bishop to D6. Pretty much what you're going to see with the opening of this game is like literally exactly how you're supposed to open the game up. So if you have any questions as to how you're supposed to develop your pieces and what you're supposed to be doing for the first 10 to 15 moves, this game will show you exactly what you need to be doing. Knight B comes to D2. We got castles by black. Bishop comes to D3. C5. Pawn takes C5. Bishop takes C5. So it kind of maybe just a touch wasted tempo for black, but nothing crazy. You did move your pawn twice as white. We got castles by white. Knight B to D7. C4. B6. Rook comes to C1. Bishop comes to B7. Queen goes to E2. We see rook over to C8. Rook F to D1. We got queen to E7. And like I said, if you want a picturesque situation to show you and exactly let you know how you develop your pieces, this exactly is it. Both players have pretty much touched each piece one time, except for the little pawn exchange that we had right here in the middle of the board. That's pretty much it. Other than that, each player used each move to put a piece in the right spot. You got these rooks connected. You got these rooks connected. This is a possible, opening up file. So you guys both have rooks on each one. So like I said, and some of the times, you kind of see somebody not developing, or you see some craziness going on over here. No, this is beautiful. So yeah, if you want to save this video or you want to show this video to somebody and say, hey man, this is what you're supposed to do, feel free to do so. We have pawn takes D5, E5. Bishop comes to G5 because I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that if you back up this bishop, you are subject to a pin here. Or a fork, I'm sorry. You are forking these two pieces because this knight does have the ability to move. So you need to pin it because now, after bishop comes to G5, you cannot do it now because, you have knight. You have the knight coming here and taking, and I mean, you're just pinned. So I mean, you definitely don't want to take the knight with the queen. So, that is why we saw bishop to G5. And so we got bishop taking D5. We see bishop to A6, a nice little clearing move because now, as you guys can see, they do kind of have a touch in this position because they do have both of their rook on completely open files. So they maybe just slightly ahead of black a little bit. Rook C comes to D8. The knight comes to C4, throwing a little double attack on this pawn, but it is double defended, so you're good. Bishop comes to C6. We got A3, H6. Bishop comes to H4. We see bishop down to A4. And these are kind of annoying moves because you are kind of throwing a little tickle, on these rooks. And so once you've gotten your rooks to great squares, you really don't want to move them. So that's kind of the inconvenience as far as black and white is concerned. Rook comes to E1. We see E4. We got knight to D4, and this actually does allow white to get a little something. Bishop takes D4, pawn takes D4. So as you guys can see, white has a passed pawn. So that is the major difference in the position. Both black and white pretty much are doing almost the exact same thing, but for black, this is not a passed pawn. For white, this is a passed pawn. So now the problem becomes with black is now you have to blockade this pawn with pieces because you don't have any way to put a pawn in the way. You don't have any pawns on either side that can stop it from moving to, because you're going to capture it. So now whenever you have a passed pawn, you're playing against a passed pawn. Now you start to have to use your heavy pieces to block it. So we got knight back to B8. Knight comes down to E3. We see knight takes A6. Queen takes A6. Queen over to D7. We see queen over to C4. You know, and we do kind of have a little bit of an issue possibly with this bishop taking this knight and, you know, causing some you know, weaknesses in the king's position. We do see rook to c8 because we don't want to give white the chance to do that. So queen comes to b4, which actually is a pretty nice square for the queen to go to. Knight comes over to h5 because, you know, we have to move away from that bishop takes f6 situation. Bishop comes down to g3. And, you know, we're not worried about knight taking g3. You're going to be taking with the pawn here. And, you know, black definitely has this pawn that they need to worry about. Stuff like that. So we actually see bishop coming back to c6. And it is actually in this position that white has, I think it's a very, very hard move to find. So look very closely. Oh, yes. Before I forget, I just remembered. I was asked to give a shout out. So RKEETV. Shout out to you, bro. Appreciate you. I've seen you for quite a while, some months now at least. So, you know, you've definitely been a supporter. So I appreciate it very much. And I will make sure that I send you that I respond back to a comment and leave you about 6 minutes in or whatever for the shout out. But we have I think this is a very, very like really, really hard move to find. So dig deep and think hard and pause the video and see if you can guess what white has the ability to play here. Okay, cool. I was just joking. This is not a hard move to find. I think that almost all of you guys should find this move. It's like one of the kind of the most obvious things that you can think of in the position as white. You have this passed pawn here, like I mentioned before. Push the pawn. So if you guessed a d5, you would be absolutely correct. Passed pawns must be pushed. You definitely don't have the ability to take here because you're going to be looking at rook swinging over, and then, you know, you might try to defend this way, but the queen is going to swing over, and you just don't have the ability to hold that piece. And this is a recurring theme through the next like 5, 6, 7, 8 moves, that you really can't touch this pawn on d5. So it's a really nice strength for white. So white is actually doing really, really well in this position, and they definitely kind of have, you know, they're in the driver's seat. So bishop comes back to d7, and it's actually right now that you know, Jeffery Xiong, he actually kind of gives the game back, like, you know, he gives back a lot in this position. There are a couple of different moves that you can make in the position. You know, there's queen to d6, just forcing a trade of the queens, and, you know, basically removing one of the attackers of this pawn. You know, there's also bishop to e5, because we don't really want the knight to come back here. We want to snap it off as soon as it gets there, because that will be one of the attackers of d5. So everything that you're doing as white is centering around trying to make sure that d5 is not attacked and that it's well protected. So either one of these moves definitely do that. You know, Jeffery Xiong does move queen takes e4, but unfortunately this allows black to attack white, the queen and d5 with tempo. So we see knight coming to f6, and like I said, now we have 3 attackers. We got 3 attackers of the d5 pawn, and you know, it kind of seemed like you were winning a pawn with queen takes e4. But like I said, it allows black to basically give a triple attack on this pawn and also hit the queen as well. So now you're dropping your own, like, really, really super strong pawn. So the queen comes back to d3. We see knight takes d5, rook takes c8, rook takes c8, and then we have knight to f5. If you did get in the move to say, hey, man, let me just pin this rook, like this knight, like, what's the worst that could happen? Well, queen coming to e6 is actually bad because you do have some back rank issues. So, you know, you definitely can't go into nothing like this, because this is going to be like a super oops, because you're going to be basically dropping your queen. And of course we can't do that because we're looking at this and this is just back rank made. So, you know, only black has luft. So going back to what we had in the game, you know, knight went to f6. We saw this. We saw all of this stuff come up. And then the knight came to f5. And so we see rook over to e8. We got rook takes e8, rook takes, queen takes e8. We see h3. Now white is giving themselves luft. It is, yeah. So, you know, we don't have any back rank issues anymore. So queen comes to d7. You know, kind of a little bit pin, you know, like threatening some type of something with this knight moving or something. Bishop comes with the b8. You know, we're trying to tickle this pawn over here. Like, you know, why not? Let's attack something, right? Bishop comes to c6, so now that's no longer relevant. Bishop comes back to g3. We see knight to f6. Offering a trade of queen, so we go ahead and oblige. Queen takes d7. Bishop takes d7. Knight comes down to d4. Because, you know, the bishop was attacking it on f5. Knight comes to d5, king comes to f1, knight comes back, knight goes to e7, and then we have bishop back to b8. So we're like, hey, let's tickle the pawn again. And I mean, this pawn is ticklish, so it moves to a6. We see bishop to c7. That pawn is ticklish. We see b5. So now we don't really have a way to attack, you know, black's pawns anymore. So we got king to e2. We got f6. King comes to d3. King comes to f7. We got king to e4. We got g6. So what we're trying to work on here for you know, basically from black's perspective, because white does have like a more commanding position in the center of the board. As you guys can see, this knight and this king are a lot better placed than black's pieces. Black is trying to prevent white from being able to make like further, you know, it's trying to prevent, you know, white from making any further progress. So, you know, we're not trying to allow any pieces to like, you know, kind of hop into f5. You know, we're trying to prevent, you know, we're trying to create like some type of wall so like white doesn't have the ability to keep going forward. Because if we allow white to get to this side of the board, maybe it's threatening our pawns a little bit. So we got f3. We see knight down to f5, and this is kind of forcing the matter. You don't really have any good places to go with your knight because you're basically just going to be giving up ground. So, I mean, you kind of have to trade here. So, knight takes f5, bishop takes f5. We got king to d4. We got b4 trying to disrupt white's pawn structure. And so we see pawn takes b4. We see h5, g4, bishop comes back to d7. And you guys will notice in the position that we do have bishops of opposite colors. So basically, as long as both sides kind of do what they need to do, they're going to end up getting their draw for the game. And now the problem with these two pawns is they're doubled, and there really isn't a good way to push b5. If b5 is ever played, bishop is going to snap on b5, and you just lost a pawn. And there isn't going to be any other way for you to just continue to push this pawn because it's going to reach the same fate, you know, if you push it to b5. b5 is literally like a dead square. So, you know, once we see king down to e3, pawn takes g4, pawn takes g4, we got f5, pawn takes f5, bishop takes f5. You know, I mean, as you guys can see, there really is never a good way to push these pawns. So it's almost like you don't even have any pawns on the queen side. And I mean, this pawn is never going anywhere either. There just is never a way for you to try to make any progress up. And it's pretty much the same for black. I mean, as soon as black tries to push a pawn, it's going to get snapped. As soon as black tries to push these pawns, it's going to get snapped. There isn't a way to force this to happen for either side. So we see king to d4, bishop comes back to d7, king to e3, bishop to f5, king to d4. We see bishop to e6. We got king to e3, bishop to f5. King comes back to d4, and we do have a draw by threefold repetition. So that is all she wrote for that game. I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. As always, my people in the Philippines, I would say Makito Tayo Mamaya and Pa Alam. And I'm constantly working. I'm constantly, you know, as you guys give me comments and stuff like that on my videos, I'm always picking words, you know, out of there. So I'm constantly working to try to create, you know, different phrases and sentences and words and things like that. So it looked like both players were Malakas today. So appreciate you guys very much, and I'll see you guys next time.